Hello, I'm John Butler, Investment Director at Southbank Investment Research, and I'm joined today by Godfrey Bloom. Godfrey has had a long, distinguished, and perhaps most importantly, varied career as a British Army officer, as a professional and executive in the City of London, and also as a member of the European Parliament for Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. While in the European Parliament and after, he campaigned for Brexit and continues to champion British independence and the British national interest every chance he gets. But it's that long and varied and distinguished career and experience that I believe provides Godfrey the sort of skill set that we absolutely need today if we're going to start thinking seriously about how we're going to solve the problems we face and the mess we're in. So I'm sure you'll welcome Godfrey Bloom. Godfrey, thank you for joining me today.
Well, a pleasure to be invited, John. Thank you so much.
Well, look, it just seems to me that we really are in quite a mess, a multidimensional mess, if you'd like to say, one that could benefit from your expertise and knowledge and experience. I mean, there are just so many problems today along so many different dimensions. I almost don't know where to begin. What do you think are the most pressing issues we face, and how might we begin to confront them and deal with them?
Well, you're right, John. There's so many, but I think I really need to start. I think the most pressing thing at the moment is the danger that we have of slipping into a world war, which we did in 1914, almost blindfold. And historians, and I am one of them, who still look back in July 1914 to wonder how the hell we got into such a mess. And it started small. It started in Bosnia. It started with the lineup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire against Serbia. And then Russia supported Serbia. And then the German Empire decided it really had to support the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Then it drew in the French. And we felt that we had to support the French, something which I think to this day was a tragic mistake. And it cost the British Empire 3 million war casualties and the demise and the fall of the British Empire, and no good came of it. Now, I've lectured on this at many universities, and I've written a lot about it, but I seem to see the same thing developing now. We have in the Ukraine, we have a massive propaganda campaign, which is run by the United States Military-Industrial Congressional Complex, the CIA and MI6. It's a massive propaganda campaign that we haven't really seen in this form since perhaps the Northcliffe Press of 1914, 1915, 1916.
Wow.
So the man on the Clapham omnibus, which the British would call it, and of course Joe Sixpack, where the Americans might call it, have been sold one line and one line only for the last 3 years, that the Russian Federation invaded Ukraine totally unprovoked for no reason whatsoever, except Putin and the Russian people are evil. This is simply absurd, and I've had Colonel Doug McGregor on my channel and many other top historians and analysts and military analysts. They're not allowed on mainstream media. So if I go to my pub, the Wheat Sheaf in Howden, for example, it's full of Daily Express readers who are absolutely convinced that one day Putin woke up with a sore head because he's had too much vodka and he decided to invade the Ukraine because he was bored. That is the general perceived view in the West. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's very worrying. And the escalation is happening slice by slice as the Ukraine army, the NATO proxy army, is losing, as I said it was on all my blogs and podcasts and articles 3 or 4 years ago. You cannot fight the Russians in their backyard. And it was interesting to give you a quote from the Staff College at Camberley, the British Army Staff College, in 1946, when Bernard Montgomery, Field Marshal Montgomery, was giving a lecture. And somebody in the audience said, who were senior army officers, war-hardened officers, said, Field Marshal, can you give us one? Can you give us one tip that we could take away? One thing to take away as we finish our term at the college. And he said, yes. He said, I can do that quite easily in one sentence. Never march on Russia. And
Well,
we didn't listen to him, and we're not listening now.
well, there's plenty of historical evidence to suggest that getting into a land war in Asia is an extremely bad idea. And of course, yes, that would include modern day Russia. I can absolutely appreciate your concern. There are many people who are concerned, and it's also concerning perhaps that the government and media have perhaps not been quite as forthcoming as they might have been, and indeed might have even been spinning some tall tales to try to get public support for what is an extremely dangerous policy position. Do you think there is any chance that the upcoming UK election might see any meaningful change in the country's foreign policy stance in this regard?
No, I don't, sadly, because Parliament has now abrogated itself completely from the running or the strategic or tactical running of Great Britain. It's gone. Been gone for some years, or certainly it's been reducing for some years. Sunak and his predecessors were World Economic Forum stooges, and they have been stooges. Keir Starmer is a self-confessed stooge. When he was asked at the last Davos meeting, the one that's just gone, I think it was, he said, well, where do you think the influence should be? Should it be, or where's it coming from? What is your view, Mr. Starmer, or Sir Keir? Got a knighthood, God knows how he got that, but they seem to be handing them out like cigarettes these days. But he said, Keir Starmer said, oh, Davos. Davos is where the action is. Davos is what it's all about. So it doesn't matter. Everybody in the United Kingdom at the moment, no, it's not going to make one whit of difference if Sunak, who is an ex-Goldman Sachs World Economic Forum stooge, is replaced by another self-confessed stooge. So the West is now run wholly by the World Economic Forum. So there won't be any change in an election in the United Kingdom because we don't run our own foreign policy. Our foreign policy is run by Washington and has been for decades. So it doesn't matter who we vote for in North America, France, England. You can't change the system by voting it out. That's the tragedy.
Well, and it sounds like what you're saying doesn't only apply to foreign and military affairs, but also to economic affairs. You mentioned the Chancellor of the Exchequer a moment ago. I recently interviewed Bob Liddon, who's recently published a report about Rachel Reeves' plans in the event that Labour does form the next government. And he's concerned that what she would do on economic policy would be just to extrapolate what Blair and Brown were doing and the legacy that they left us, which of course includes the global financial crisis of 2008-9 and all the unprecedented measures that were taken to contain that. You've written extensively on economics as well, including the so-called Austrian School of Economics, which is highly, highly critical of modern economic policy, including the way central banking is implemented. Do you see any hope that there's any progress that we could make somehow on the economic front following the elections?
No, I don't, because it's just more of the same, and they're really quite upfront. It's more of the same. Now, I sat for 5 years in the European Parliament in the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee. That's just the committee I was sitting on, which was quite interesting because it was largely full of Danish housewives, Belgian socialists, Bulgarian trade unionists, so on and so forth. So that committee had no more idea about economic strategy than fly to the moon. But then, of course, neither do the central banks. So all the leaders of the central banks, and I mentioned this at the time when the new man took over from Carney, he was a box ticker. They're box tickers. They're told what to do by the IMF and the Bank of International Settlements, all part of the UN, and it's all part of the WEF program. And of course, what old chaps of my age know as Keynesianism is now called modern monetary theory. It's exactly the same thing. It is the idea, basically, that If you are a government, the basic rules of economics don't apply to you. If you continue, John, to spend more money than you actually earn, you'll go bankrupt. If you have a company that continues to spend more than it can raise in profit, will go bankrupt. But there is this feeling that that doesn't apply somehow to countries. But of course it does. And they say, yes, but how can the United States go bankrupt? How can Britain go bankrupt? Because they can print money. Well, yes, of course they can print money. But of course, it's only a life support machine. That doesn't really work, because what you've got is a situation where the money is totally degraded. We're seeing that degraded all the time, year by year. And it doesn't matter whether it's the dollar, the yen, the euro. It doesn't matter what it is, it's degraded. And of course, as an Austrian school economist, I would argue, and if you look for, and our definition of inflation, of course, is monetary inflation, not the CPI or IPI, that right. kind of thing. That's something outside the thing. It's monetary inflation. So where does that leave us? Where does that take us? Well, if you look at when Nixon closed the gold window in 1970, and I was around at the time, 71, I think it was, I was around at the time, and he brought the dollar off the gold standard so he could fight a war. You could trace this back, nearly 800 years. If you degrade your currency, it's usually to fight wars, and no good ever comes of it, because no good ever comes of war. Nobody really wins at the end of the day. And if you degrade your currency, if you see the demise of the Roman Empire, it was the failure to control borders that brought down the Roman Empire, and the degradation of their currency. Ringing any bells? Is this ringing any bells? And of course, if you peg it against gold, for example, from 1971, as you'll know, and I'm sure everybody in your channel, and do excuse me for teaching Granny to suck eggs, John. Forgive me for this. But if you take the dollar as purchasing power as against gold today, it's now in the region of 6 cents. The collapse of the United States dollar, the reserve currency, and of course other currencies have collapsed even more. Even the Swiss franc has collapsed, but albeit not to the extent of the United States dollar, but it's still degraded quite significantly. So this is the problem. This is the problem, that you degrade money, and then of course people come out of the woodwork with another brilliant idea. And the next brilliant idea, of course, is central banking digital currency, central bank's digital currency, which of course is then programmable, which gives you your World Economic Forum desire, your United Nations and so on and so forth, your WHO, all these people are locked together in this one system, programmable. And of course, believe it or not, I'm old enough to remember rationing in the war. There were still 1 or 2 ration books. Well, I was born in 1949. There were a few ration books around when I was 3 or 4 still on one or two things in 1952, 53. And I remember the books, in the kitchen from my mother. We will be told how much you can have. So you go into the butcher. If you went into the butcher in 1944, you've had your ration of sausage. You've had your ration of whatever it may be. You've got your little bit of meat. On the same with all the other things. You're rationed. Your petrol is rationed. This is what they want to do. And if it's programmable, you will go in, you'll have your card, you'll have your digital currency, and they will say, I'm sorry, Mr. Butler, you had enough train and rail travel or air travel this year. You're out. You can't go anywhere. Or to the ordinary people, it'll be, you've had enough holidays. Or you can't drive your car, you've got public transport, you must use public transport. Or you've had enough steak or meat or corned beef, whatever it is. And of course, we know this is going to happen. We know this is going to happen because we also know that every single banker and every single politician lies as soon as they open their mouth. So we know that when the Bank of England governor and other central bank governors said, no, we won't program it. We won't do this. You know that means they will do it. That's why if they deny something, I remember the political program we had years ago, some of your viewers might know about it, was Yes Minister.
Yeah, Yes Minister, yeah.
And that was very funny because one civil servant and talking to the Prime Minister said, "Oh, my goodness me, the Treasury has publicly denied it." And the response was, "Oh God, so it is true."
Right. Exactly. Well, it is important in these times to keep a sense of humor. I know many people who are deeply concerned about the state of the economy and about the prospect of the future introduction of a central bank digital currency, and the fact that that would, in theory, completely do away with financial privacy, and as you point out, could also be used as a tool to enforce de facto rationing of certain types of consumer goods. It all sounds a bit dystopian, but it is concerning that that sort of technology not only does now exist in principle, but that so many people in power are talking about how they might implement that technology in practice. Most of our viewers today are self-directed investors. They tend to be quite defensive and conservative regarding protecting their wealth. Would you have any advice, notwithstanding how grim this all sounds, any advice what measures they might take to try and protect themselves in this very, very concerning world that we're entering into?
Well, I would argue, and I managed pension funds for many years with Mercury Asset Management and other big players in the pension field, and where a conservative investment view was actually de rigueur. You had to be conservative because you had to pay people's pensions when they retired.
Right.
So you had to be very careful. Now, having said that, the bond market is in a precarious position, as I used to do some commercial lecturing at Institute of Banking and stuff like this. If interest rates start to go up, the capital value of your bonds fall. That, to you and I, of course, that's basic common sense. We know that, that's a given. But it's not, generally speaking, fully understood by people that your capital value will fall as interest rates go up. That puts bonds in a very precarious position, right? Because there's all talk now about interest rates coming down and inflation being stopped or cured, which isn't true. As any housewife watching this will tell you, she knows that to be the case. So again, we're being lied to. And if you have interest rates, even if you take T-bills, for example, let's say they're moving to 4.5%, or even 5%, we know that that doesn't meet inflation. We know that. So we know that your money is being degraded. So where you might normally go for bonds, US Treasury bills, who would have thought a bank or banks in America could go broke or become insolvent with 100% T-bills? You would have thought they'd be the last bank to fall. Quite the opposite, because they didn't understand if interest rates go up, the capital value falls. So you can hold your bonds to maturity. But if inflation, and I use high street inflation as opposed to monetary inflation, if you use that, you're going to be losing 5 or 6% of the value of your spending power, of your savings forever. Now, there's only one thing that I believe that you can circumnavigate that, and that is gold in specie. That is my call. Gold in specie, there's no counterparty risk, and it stood the test of time, one might argue, for 5,000 years. So that is what I like. And as far as UK investors are concerned, and I don't know enough about the tax position of other countries, of course, if you buy sovereigns, which is coin of the realm, or Britannias of coin of the realm, there's no VAT on gold sovereigns or gold Britannias, and there's no capital gains tax. So you're in a very tax-advantaged situation, and historically, it protects you against inflation over the long term. And if I may give an example of that, in 1816 or 1817, when after the Napoleonic Wars were finished, and we'd thrashed the French again, tee-hee, we went back onto the gold standard. So there was sovereigns, the gold sovereign, that's when it sort of manifested itself. And because we were on the gold standard, if one accepts that the staple commodity of the 1800s, for example, was bread, which I don't think is an unreasonable supposition.
No.
The value of a loaf, the price of a loaf of bread in 1816 was exactly the same as it was in 1913, because we stayed on the gold standard. And if you take perhaps from, let's say, 1900, for example, if you take the staple commodity, global needed commodity, must have, I would suggest, is oil. And if you look at the price of oil against gold from about 1900 onwards to today, you'll find it spooky. It's really spooky. You will find it's exactly, the line on your graph goes exactly in tandem. And so it shows that it preserves your purchasing power. But you must hold it in specie. If you want a lot of it and you want to take delivery, obviously you might be worried. You might have to go to a safety deposit institution. I don't mean banks. Banks are owned by governments. They can steal it. And that brings me on to arguments I sometimes have with Bitcoiners. Bitcoins are fairly evangelical about Bitcoin, which is understandable, because we both agree, gold bugs and Bitcoiners, is that the only way to preserve yourself is to take your money off the table, walk away from the table. You have to get out of the casino system, and you have to rely on what you've got. Now, that's fine. That's fine. But you must control your gold, and you must control, obviously, your Bitcoin wallet-wise. And I would say, as an addendum to that on Bitcoin, no good will ever come of people like BlackRock running ETFs on Bitcoin. The whole point of Bitcoin was that people like Larry Fink couldn't get their greasy mitts on it, all right? But no, if you let them in through the back door, you'll find they will manipulate, in much the same way as they've manipulated for years, the price of precious metals. And if you think that you're safe because you're the only one that has your code, think Julian Assange. The government can suspend habeas corpus. They can lock you up in solitary confinement. How long before people break and give their code for their wallet in Bitcoin? I doubt most Bitcoiners wouldn't last more than a week. Be about a week before they cried uncle.
Well, I'm sure that's true of most people generally, who are imprisoned against their will for a crime that's not even a crime, and in which they possibly don't even understand, in sort of the spirit of Kafka or something such as that. Well, look, that I'm sure is helpful advice. I'm sure that will be taken on board by our viewers, who might also like to learn more about your work and your most recent book. Could you let us know where they could find some of your work, and let them know where they could find your recent book?
That's very kind. All my books, all the books are available. All the articles I've written in the past for various magazines are still there, because even though some were written 5 or 6 years ago, they've all proved to come true, particularly on things like the Ukraine and banking and the degradation of money. My wife's view is that the reason I have no mates is because I'm always right, and nobody likes a smartass. But if you doubt me, if you go to my website, nothing's ever been taken down in embarrassment. It's just simple. It's godfreybloom.uk. And everything you need is there. There's a health page. There's a gold page. The gold page is, I gather, my producer told me that is the most comprehensive not-for-profit gold page in Britain today. There's health, there's gold, and there's climate. So if you want to know the truth about climate science and so on, you'll find top experts. I only edit, incidentally. I edit. My own work is there, but it's edited and it's top, including Alistair MacLeod and people of that kind of thing. So that's it. And I think people might enjoy having a look at it. I do welcome comment. Anybody's got any input, you will get a reply. I repeat, it's not for profit. It's pro bono publico. I'm an old geezer now, and I don't need to make any money, although I need to pay my techie and stuff I don't understand. So advertising does make a little bit of money, but it's not for profit. I'm not trying to sell you anything.
Understood. And I'm sure that our viewers appreciate that. And I'm sure that many of them will go to your website and have a look at your past work as well as your current work. And I'm sure everyone appreciates your time with us today, pro bono as it were. And thank you very much. Delightful to have you here. Very, very thought-provoking, that's for sure. And thank you, Godfrey.
Thank you for inviting me again.
Fantastic. Well, that was Godfrey Bloom with some very, very interesting opinions about what's happening in the world, but well-researched opinions that come out of a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and a willingness to see the world as it is, not the way he would necessarily like it to be. Thank you for joining me today. I'm John Butler, Investment Director at Southbank Investment Research.